From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. Emma Kaneira, thank you so much for joining me today. You are a graduating senior at Barnard College, double majoring in English and economics. And I know you because you have taken 3 years of classes here at the Language Resource Center through the Shared Course Initiative program, which is a consortial arrangement between Columbia, Cornell, and Yale for sharing some less commonly taught languages between the 3 schools via high-definition video conferencing equipped classrooms. So again, thank you for being here. And I wanted to start by asking you a question about your motivations for taking the language. You know, you are an English and economics major at Barnard. Sinhala is not really part of that.
No, definitely not.
What motivated you to sign up for that first class?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me on here. I mean, my motivation was very personal. Sinhala has no relation to English or economics or any of my future career aspirations. But I'm half Sri Lankan, and I grew up with a father who spoke Sinhala, with grandparents who spoke Sinhala, but never really being able to understand the language. Because my mother doesn't speak Sinhala and she doesn't come from that culture, Sinhala was always spoken around me, but never at me. And I had always really wanted to learn, but Sinhala is a very difficult language. You know, I mean, first off, it's a difficult language for an English speaker to learn, period. But there's also very, very, very few resources outside of the country to learn it. To my understanding, there's like no Pimsleur course, there's no Duolingo course. So this was definitely a very, I remember browsing through the course listings my fall semester here when I was a freshman and sort of being like, wow, this is a crazy opportunity.
You know, I think a lot of people might even see that listed and not know what this is or not know what language that is. So you, because of your background, you knew what that meant.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Sinhala, most people don't know what Sinhala is. A lot of Americans in particular don't even know what Sri Lanka is. So, yeah.
So actually, for anybody listening who might not know what Sinhala is, can you give a very basic introduction to what this language is and where it's spoken?
Absolutely. So, okay, Sinhala is a language spoken on the island of Sri Lanka, which is, it's the tiny teardrop-shaped island on the map off the southern coast of India. So Sinhala is one of 2 languages spoken. Sinhala is spoken, and then Sri Lankan Tamil is spoken. It's Tamil, but a different dialect. Sinhala is spoken by one of the 2 big ethnic groups on the island, which is the Sinhalese. I'm half Sinhalese. And then Tamil is spoken by the Sri Lankan Tamil ethnic group and some other ethnic minorities in the country as well.
Can you talk a little bit about when you were first looking at the course listing, did you talk to your parents about taking this? What was their reaction to this? You said that you kind of had an awareness of the language, but not really a functional or real ability to use the language. So how did they react when you first mentioned that you might take this class?
My parents were kind of the opinion that why would you take this language? You know, I think my family, and I think a lot of other families, you know, I think this is not uncommon, particularly among Sri Lankan families, has a sort of a very interesting relationship with Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan culture in general. My father, he was born in Sri Lanka, but he spent most of his childhood growing up abroad. So, you know, while he speaks Sinhala, he's not able to read or write it. And, you know, we can get into later reasons for why reading and writing in Sinhala is a lot harder than, it is in English or, a lot of other languages. But he sort of always saw it as a language that he spoke with his parents, and he was, kind of like, why would you spend a lot of time in college, this very fancy and very expensive university, to study this language that is really only spoken by our family and people back in Sri Lanka. My grandparents were ecstatic, though. My grandmother was extremely happy. You know, she also has, I think, since her 20s, lived most of her life outside of the country. And I think that she was really happy that I was just taking an interest, but also that she would be able to sort of share that cultural connection, I guess. Cultural connection with me. So Yeah, mixed emotions. Of course, when I started being able to speak it, my family members were all very impressed. They were like, "Oh, wow!"
Yeah. So So why was it important to you to take the class? Was it just you saw an opportunity and you decided to take it, or was there some deeper reason in your mind?
Kind of two reasons. The first one's a very trivial reason, and it was that I've always wanted to understand what the family gossip is.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I have a lot of relatives in Sri Lanka. A good chunk of my grandmother's siblings and a couple of my grandfathers once too lived there. So, whenever we would go there for family gatherings, everybody would be speaking in Sinhala. And, I couldn't speak it. My sister couldn't speak it. My cousins are receptively bilingual, so they would kind of translate for me a bit. But I knew that I was missing a lot. So I always really wanted to learn quite badly. And then I saw this chance and I sort of did the math with my schedule and I was like, I can make this work. That's why I took it. The second sort of, I guess, non-trivial reason though is I think, and this is a very cliche thing to say, but I think when you do grow up mixed race, especially if one of your parents comes from an immigrant background, it's really easy to feel a bit of cultural disconnect there. And I sort of saw this as a way for me to gain some cultural understanding that I didn't have previously, I guess is the best way of saying this. I'm very close with my grandparents. They lived with us since I was born, basically. And I know that they had to sort of give up a lot in order to sort of raise my father and to even provide him the opportunity to come here. And I saw this as a way of learning more about their roots and connecting with that.
So talk to me about what it was like in that first year of taking Sinhala. What kinds of things did you learn in the class? What was that class like? Was it hard? Was it easy? Did it come naturally to you? Was it a struggle? Just sort of characterize that first level, the elementary level.
Right. I mean, the elementary level, I think, has a bit of a steep learning curve because Sinhala is written in like Sinhala script, and learning that at first was a bit of a struggle. I mean, Professor Herath, I think, did a really good job of easing us into it. He was very much, kind of like, okay, here's the worksheets, do this, do this, do this. And he was patient in our reading, like we would make reading mistakes. But I remember I had to practice quite a bit to get that down. Once I got the alphabet down, a lot of things came easier because like learning how to read comes along with learning hand in hand with learning pronunciation. But prior to that, the first, I think, month or so, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what is the script like? Is it letters or is it syllables? What's the makeup of the Sinhala script?
So, it is letters. They're called akuru. It's in that sense, it's similar to the English script, but the way in which the letters are modified is different. Like in English, an A is an A, and then like depending on where that letter is in a sentence, then that modifies the way it's pronounced. But in Sinhala, that's not the case. Instead, you have different like modifier symbols. You draw like on to
like
or
diacritics
around.
that
Yes.
indicate how it may be pronounced differently.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think learning to get the hang of reading and writing that was something also that was a little bit of a struggle at first, just because it was very foreign to me.
And then what about vocabulary or grammar? Was that hard or was that not so hard?
Vocabulary, not so much. It's just mostly you just needed to learn all of it. In terms of grammar, yeah, that was, that's something I think that I still am improving on. In particular, just because Sinhala will often, it's almost like it will take the same sentence clauses but put them in a different order. And I think, understanding how that works was something that took me a bit to get the hang of. And I still, generally it's okay if you like switch clauses back, right? Like I will say sometimes I'll say a sentence in a way that is worded similar to how you would say it in English. And he's like, yeah, that's acceptable. But you also could say, like, it's more natural to say it this other way. So the language is like forgiving in that respect, but also gaining mastery of that is difficult.
Was it a speaking-based class too, or was it mostly reading and writing?
Primarily speaking based.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we did reading and writing. Like all throughout, but the reading and writing we did was sort of in supplement to the goals of getting us to be able to speak to a certain level. So this is, I guess, a little interesting wrinkle about Sinhala in general, but Sinhala is diglossic. So it, which means that the spoken Sinhala and written Sinhala are functionally two separate languages. This is why my father can't read or write Sinhala. When I was growing up, I was kind of like baffled by that because I was like, oh, well, like why, if you can speak it, why couldn't you read or write it? It's, it seems pretty similar, but it's not. So a lot of, especially the first 2 years, the written Sinhala that we were doing was written in colloquial form. So written, like it's using Sinhala Akaru, and it was writing everything out, but it was the phrases and the paragraphs were all written in the same way you would speak, because that's what people speak day to day. Formal Sinhala is what all the written materials are compiled in, and also what a lot of news broadcasts are set in, and also what some television shows are set in. So it's not just the way it's written, but it's also a more formal way of speaking that people don't usually use. And this is why I also say that, learning Sinhala outside of this class environment is very, very difficult, because getting your hands on materials that you can use to learn is also hard, because all the books are written in formal. And if you don't know colloquial, then how are you going to learn formal? It's sort of difficult to, again, without like a really excellent teacher like I've been lucky to have, it's difficult to figure out where to start and all that.
So in English, as you said, if you are maybe not familiar with some of the more formal registers of English, or you can't use them actively, you nonetheless understand them perfectly fine. It's really just a continuum of one language. So what is the distance between the formal and the colloquial version of Sinhala in your estimation?
I mean, I'm no expert on formal Sinhala. I just want to make that clear in case someone's listening to this and is like, no, that's not right. But it's completely different vocabulary, or like almost completely different. Like, for example, the word you in Sinhala is oya, in colloquial, and formal it's oba. So even the building blocks of the language are different. I believe the grammatical structure is like more or less the same, but it's just a completely different vocabulary. Like, I think it's almost as if, you had to learn like Spanish and Italian to learn Italian.
So really almost two languages in one.
Yeah, it's pretty far apart from each other. Like when my father is listening to formal news broadcast, he's not really able to tell what they're saying. Okay. He'll pick out a word, you can pick out like a word or two words, but it's just different vocabulary.
So as you progressed over the 3 years that you took the class, what were some of the things you started to work on in the second year? And then what did you work on in the third year? How did that build on the foundation that you had in the spoken colloquial Sinhala that you learned in that first year?
I mean, second year was primarily about more complicated grammar structures, more complicated vocabulary. We were reading paragraphs. The class is primarily speaking based, right? So we were doing a lot of speaking practice. Again, more complicated thoughts, and also just being able to sort of read and understand like larger chunks of text. Like maybe first year would be like, how do you say I'm going to the store, right? Second year, it's more like, how do you say I'm going to the store at 4:30 p.m. and that I'm going to like my friend's store, and that after that I plan on going back to the library, right? Yeah. So it was like very much about expanding. And then our third year we started learning more literary. So that we started to sort of practice that. And year three was also very, very much about like very focused on taking our colloquial knowledge, again expanding it, but also improving our writing and reading skills.
Yeah, interestingly, the third year class is not called Advanced Sinhala. It's called Literary Sinhala.
Yeah.
And I always wondered why is there that special name for it? But I guess this explanation about the diglossic situation between formal and colloquial explains why you would need to really learn that almost as a kind of side quest or separate pursuit to your study.
Yeah. Because I think Professor Herath at least only wanted to introduce formal to us, or I call formal literary, right? That's shorthand for the same thing. Once we had a good base in colloquial, so that we could be able to tell what words are being swapped out.
Right. Yeah. You might, if you haven't learned the sort of one first, you don't know that it's being swapped out. You might think these are two totally separate words.
Which I can tell you does in fact happen, because prior to taking this class, I'd gone to Sri Lanka and I'd gotten myself some like children's books, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. Like I'm gonna learn, and it was not good. I was like going to my grandmother and I was like, what does this sentence mean? And then like, why do you not say it that way? And
From what you're saying, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it seems like there are many speakers of Sinhala in the colloquial register, but maybe not that many people who actively know the formal version of the language. Is that the case, or does everybody kind of know the formal version, or do many people know it?
In Sri Lanka, to my understanding, everybody knows both. This is a diaspora thing.
Oh, okay.
So, like for example, I think it is primarily tied, and this is conjecture on my part, but I think it's tied to whether you were schooled in Sinhala or not. Because in Sri Lanka, everybody who goes to the public school system, and the literacy rate in Sri Lanka is like extremely high. I think it's the highest in Asia or something.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, it's everybody's like very literate. Probably because they have to learn two languages. But everybody will come out of that knowing formal and colloquial. I think it's once you move abroad and your kids are not going to that Sinhala schooling environment that the formal tends to be the first to go because it's much less useful. For example, my cousins who are essentially bilingual, they don't know formal either. They just know colloquial. My dad only knows colloquial. I have some cousins who immigrated here from Sri Lanka when they were younger. And to my understanding, at least, their colloquial is much stronger than their formal because that's used way less. So it tends to disappear faster.
So the formal register of the language is really a product of schooling. You must learn it in a kind of school environment.
To my understanding, yes. Or at least you would practice your knowledge of it in a school environment.
So what is it like to maybe be one of the only people in your family who has a deeper knowledge of that register?
It's weird.
Okay.
I mean, quite frankly, it's very strange. I mean, I remember, I was like talking to my dad, and because sometimes when I was doing the homework, I would I would get confused about something, and I was like, Herath would always encourage us, like, yeah, like, if you have family members who speak it, like, go talk to them, like, go practice with them. So I like called up my grandma, but she wasn't available. So I called up my dad, and I was like, can you help me with this? And he was like, no. So that was a bit of a strange experience.
So your teacher is Professor Bandara Herath. What is he like as a teacher? What is his persona as a teacher?
He is maybe one of the only people I would describe as jovial. He's you know what I mean? You can tell that he really enjoys his job and that he really loves teaching students. He's extremely sort of accommodating towards what your particular goals are learning the language. I mean, I think part of the reason that our class was so speaking focused was because a lot of the people in the class were members of the Sri Lankan diaspora. And our goal taking the class, right, was to be able to speak with our family members. So that was kind of, he would sort of tailor it towards, things that we were interested in knowing how to do. And he also was sort of very good, I think, about getting us to sort of speak quickly without worrying about how proper every word that we were saying was. His main goal, I think, especially in year one, was just to get us talking and to get us like talking as much as possible. And at the time, I remember being very, very nervous because I was kind of like, oh no, I don't know if I'm saying this right. I'm making all these mistakes probably. But he would just kind of be like, he'd always be like, come on now, which means like, no problem. He's just like, just keep going,
Yeah.
And I think that was really helpful in sort of getting us to start being able to actually use the language.
Yeah, fluency versus accuracy.
Yes,
and certainly
exactly.
In the beginning stages, a focus on fluency can really build people up and get them to a higher proficiency level.
Yeah. I think Sinhala in particular, because it's so foreign, is just very scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that when I first initially took Sinhala, I was terrified because I was like, oh, this class is going to be so hard. It's going to, and it ended up being just a really lovely experience.
Nice.
I've had so much fun in it throughout the 3 years I've done it.
What was it like taking this class through the shared course initiative? So you were a remote student, and I think you were typically the only remote student. And so you would be on the Columbia side in a distance classroom with two very large screens connected to the Cornell classroom. So was it comparable? Did you feel like left out, or did you feel included? What was it like learning in that modality?
I was definitely worried about that when I first started taking these classes, but I didn't really feel left out, to be honest. I mean, it was sometimes a little frustrating because I would have to go like print out the work. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't just. I would have to sort of make sure I had all my stuff with me before I came to class. But I think Herath, and I think also just the way the shared course initiatives is set up, it does a good job of sort of making you feel like you're in the classroom because of the way the screens are set up. It's like you'll be looking at everybody, and the wall across from you will have the entire classroom. So it kind of looks like you're just at the other end of a really long classroom.
Yeah. Did you ever meet him in person?
Yes, I did actually, like 4 weeks ago.
Oh, and for the first time?
Yeah, for the first time. Me and two other Sinhala students who were at different levels met up with him, and we got like dinner and coffee, and it was great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was it particularly emotional to see somebody in real life after seeing them for 2 years or more than 2 years in a virtual format?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's funny because he's been throughout the last 3 years of my undergrad education. I've taken a lot of different classes, but he's kind of been like a constant. Like Sinhala class has been a constant.
Yeah.
So it was kind of crazy getting to meet him, and particularly because like my grandmother also was like, "Oh yeah, how's Professor Herath doing?"
That's funny.
I mean, they ask about each other,
Right? Yeah.
Like they've never met in person, but they like she knows that he exists and he knows that she exists. So
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, how's your family? How's so and so
Nice.
doing?"
They know that each other is
Yeah.
out there. So you talked about how your teacher, Herath, was really good at helping students develop their own interests and follow their own particular paths in the class. So what were some of the things that you were interested in as you moved through this sequence?
I mean, when I first came into the program, I was sort of up for anything. But I especially in this past year, given the fact that I had applied for a Fulbright, we started to sort of really drill very practical knowledge things, right? He was like, okay, how do you say, I want to go give me a bus ticket to go to this town at this time, which again is it's like not a crazy complicated sentence, but I think especially if you're doing like a lot of reading and a lot of, it's easy to sort of miss those simple phrases.
So over the course of the past year, you have been taking the class with the knowledge that you would go to Sri Lanka or that you might go there.
Might go, yeah. That was the hope. Because I applied for the Fulbright back in, I think I submitted the application in October, and I found out that I made semifinalists in January. And, since I submitted it in October, which Professor Herath also had a hand in that, I was going over my grant application with him. He wrote me a recommendation, like a language eval, and going back and forth, like in the intervening waiting period, I was sort of, I was trying not to bank on it. So I was trying not to be like, prepare myself too much. But he was always like, okay, so how do you say, I need to go to like take a bus from here to here. How do you say like, where's this place, kind of thing.
Tell me about why you decided to apply for a Fulbright.
I mean, it was kind of a direct outgrowth of this class. So to clarify, my Fulbright's a research Fulbright. So I'm doing research on barriers to accessing legal aid in Sri Lanka, which is a project that is like sort of stems from my personal interest in civil legal aid. I've done a lot of work with civil legal aid organizations during my time in undergraduate. I'm going to law school in the future after I get back from my Fulbright, but my ability to like successfully apply for the Fulbright and to develop this project was directly due to the fact that, because I was in this class, Sri Lanka was something I was thinking about a lot more than I think I would have otherwise. Sri Lanka also in 2022 had this really big financial crisis and an economic crisis. I was there for part of that. My family, because this was right after COVID, my grandparents had really wanted to go see their relatives, and they were sort of like, okay, well, we got to go regardless, I think especially my grandfather, his sister, I mean, he's 88 and his sister is now 89. So at the time he was, kind of like, I need to go check on my older sister. She's been there for 3 years. You know what I mean? Like, I need to make sure she's okay.
Yeah.
So, they went back and we went back too. And so I was there for a lot of the events that happened over that summer, which was crazy in and of itself. But, getting back and then going straight into Sinhala class kind of made me think about that and keep that at the forefront of my mind. And when I was sort of thinking of, well, what do I want to do after graduating undergraduate? Do I want to go straight into law school? Do I want to do something else? It just kind of seemed like a perfect fit for my research interests and also the place that I wanted to do that research in.
So how do you imagine spending this Fulbright year studying legal issues in legal access issues
Yeah.
in Sri Lanka? How do you imagine that will in some way impact or shape the work that you do in law school and then in your career?
I mean, I think it's going to directly impact because part of what I'm trying to sort of figure out while I'm over there is what are the barriers to accessing legal aid among different Sri Lankan demographics and how have those barriers been circumvented? And I think Americans have a lot of issues accessing civil legal aid. It's locational issues, language issues, time issues. And it's very, the issues that Americans have and the issues that Sri Lankans have are similar, but different in a matter of degree. I mean, obviously, the issue of getting transportation to a place, and this is something I saw when I was working at the New York Legal Assistance Group's Pro Se Clinic, is a big issue in New York City. And, New York City has like regularly running buses and trains and subways. In Sri Lanka, in, perhaps an area of the country where it's much more like you're having to travel much longer distances, that becomes a much bigger problem. In an area of the country where you might have rolling power blackouts, accessing things over the internet becomes much harder. So I think being able to go there and figure out how people have come up with ways to sort of reach people despite these issues is going to directly inform the way that I not just practice law, but the way I look at policy and the way I look at issues of how civil legal aid is able to help people improve their lives. People can't be helped by legal aid if they can't access it. So
Yeah.
I think the issues of both just doing the work as a lawyer and also making sure that your clients are able to access your services are sort of intertwined very tightly.
So do you think that there's a way that the perspective of learning the language and the culture will kind of feed back into what you might do in your career? I know the language is, not a lot of people in the US speak Sinhala, but just kind of the perspective that you gain in learning another language.
Definitely. I think also it's just kind of the biggest thing out of all this is it's opened my eyes to how much language impacts the way people look at the world. And it's made me really eager to go forth and learn other languages. I know a little bit of Spanish from high school, and this has sort of made it much more imperative to me that like, okay, I need to learn Spanish, while I'm in law school, or, some other languages that are spoken by populations that often come to civil legal aid centers for help. It's just sort of made me think about, this is a much more important part of the practice than I'd originally thought. I think oftentimes language is seen, like within civil legal aid work, language is seen as something that you have to take into as an extra consideration when you're doing the work. Like, you'll have like signs in Spanish and signs in English, or you'll have like flyers in Spanish and flyers in English, or in Haitian Creole, or like some of the other languages spoken. But I think, the importance of having a provider there that is familiar with that language and that culture has become much more apparent to me.
So it's really not just a kind of superficial thing. Oh, we have a sign. Oh, we have this, we have that. But really, it's about that deeper meaning of having access to legal aid.
Yeah.
And so access is not just like, oh, here's a card. It's like understanding where somebody's coming from, explaining something in a way that you're sure is understood, that kind of thing.
And being able to sort of meet them where they're at.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful reflection and a very applied look at the way in which learning a language and learning a culture has an impact on a field outside of just language learning. The way that the legal profession, which itself is sort of constructed through language.
Oh yes. Oh, I have like so much to say about this. I mean, like that is also one of the barriers to people's ability to access the legal system is the legal system itself. People come in and they don't know how to understand legalese. I mean, when I first started working there, I was like, I have no idea how this works. Court systems, like the methods of like filing a brief and like, figuring out, how do you get from A to B to C? Where's your case at? What is going on? That in and of itself is a lot of steps to take to keep track of, especially, as many of our clients are, if you're working a very demanding job or if you have children to take care of. And that becomes compounded, by the fact of like, oh, I don't understand what a motion to appeal is. I don't understand what this document refers to. I don't know what they mean when they say this. And that's a whole nother layer of complication. And then you stack on top of that for people who English is their second language. It just becomes so convoluted and so clear that a big reason why, people are not able to use the court system in the way that it was intended is it's a language issue.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you really need people who can help bridge that multi-level gap in understanding.
Yeah.
Well, Emma Kaneira, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I wish you a wonderful Fulbright and all the best in your future career in the legal profession.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.